Congratulations. You've finished medical school. Years of studying anatomy, memorizing diseases, surviving exams, and pretending you totally understood whatever your professor was talking about have finally paid off. You're a doctor. Your family is proud. You've got a respectable career ahead of you. There's just one fairly significant problem. You live in Nazi Germany. Yeah, that's going to complicate things. And today, we're going to follow what your life could have looked like as a German doctor who eventually finds himself working inside the Nazi concentration camp system. And before we continue, although you're fictional, the system, policies, and atrocities we're talking about were very real. So, congratulations on becoming a doctor. Unfortunately, you've chosen possibly the worst server in human history to spawn into. Chapter 1. You picked a terrible time to graduate. It's the 1930s. Germany is still recovering from the First World War. The Great Depression has devastated the economy, and politics are becoming increasingly extreme. Then, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party take power in 1933. At first, your daily life as a young doctor might still look relatively normal. Patients come in, you examine them, prescribe medicine, tell someone for the 17th time that smoking probably isn't helping their cough. Normal doctor stuff. Except medicine itself is beginning to change. The Nazi government doesn't just want doctors treating individuals. It wants doctors helping reshape German society according to Nazi racial ideology. And that's where things start getting very dark. New laws appear. Jewish doctors are increasingly excluded from the profession. Universities and hospitals are brought under Nazi control. Doctors are pressured to join Nazi organizations. And suddenly your medical career isn't only about medicine. It's political. You might join the Nazi Party. Maybe because you genuinely believe in it. Maybe because it'll help your career. Maybe because everyone around you seems to be doing it. Whatever your reason, you've just made an extremely consequential decision. Career opportunities. +20. Moral integrity. -500. Chapter 2. Medicine becomes something else. Here's something important to understand. The Nazis were obsessed with the idea of creating what they considered a racially pure and healthy German population. And doctors became extremely important to that project. Instead of simply asking, "How can I help this patient?" doctors were increasingly encouraged to ask, "Is this person useful to the nation?" That is an extraordinarily dangerous change. Because once doctors stop viewing every patient as an individual human being deserving care, medicine can become a weapon. In 1933, the Nazi government introduces the Law for the Prevention of Hereditarily Diseased Offspring. Under this policy, hundreds of thousands of people would eventually be forcibly sterilized. People diagnosed with conditions the regime considered hereditary could be prevented from having children, and doctors helped decide who qualified. So your paperwork might now determine whether someone is allowed to have a family, which is slightly more consequential than forgetting to sign someone's sick note. And things continue getting worse. Chapter 3. The Euthanasia Program. By the beginning of the Second World War, Nazi medical policy crosses another line. People with disabilities and psychiatric conditions become targets of what became known as the Action T4 killing program. Doctors and administrators reviewed patient files. Sometimes they never even met the person. They'd look at paperwork containing someone's diagnosis, ability to work, and medical history. Then they'd mark the file. One decision could determine whether that person lived or died. Imagine that. You've spent years learning how to save lives. Now the government is asking doctors to decide which lives are supposedly not worth saving. Thousands of children and adults are murdered through these programs. And although public protests eventually forced the Nazis to officially halt the Central T4 operation in 1941, the killing continues in other forms. This is one of those moments where there isn't really room for a joke. Because this wasn't medicine. It was murder, carried out with medical language surrounding it. Chapter 4. You join the SS. At some point, your career takes another turn. You join the SS. Fantastic career decision. Surely historians are going to look favorably upon this. Nope. As an SS doctor, you could be assigned to military units, hospitals, or concentration camps. And one morning, your orders arrive. You're being transferred. Destination: a concentration camp. Oh, that's probably not good. No, It is not. Chapter 5. Arriving at the camp. When you arrive, the difference between your old hospital and this place is immediate. Barbed wire, guard towers, SS personnel, barracks packed with prisoners, people suffering from starvation and disease. This isn't a hospital. And you're quickly going to discover that being called a doctor here means something completely different. Officially, camp doctors had responsibilities involving sanitation, disease control, and the health of SS personnel. But they also became directly involved in the persecution and murder of prisoners. And one of your most horrifying responsibilities could involve prisoner selections. Chapter 6. The selections. At extermination camps such as Auschwitz-Birkenau, transports carrying Jewish deportees and other prisoners arrive. People step off trains confused and exhausted. Families are together. Children hold their parents' hands. Some people believe they're being relocated. Then, SS personnel begin separating them, and doctors participate in deciding who is considered capable of forced labor. A quick look, a question about age, maybe their physical condition, and then, in one direction or the other. For many of the people judged unable to work, including children, elderly people, and people who were ill, the destination was the gas chambers. Sometimes the decision took seconds. That's one of the most disturbing things about the entire system. Mass murder became routine, administrative. A gesture from someone wearing a uniform could determine whether another human being survived the next hour. And somehow, after doing this, you might go back to your quarters, eat dinner, talk with colleagues, go to sleep, then wake up and do it again. That normalization is important, because enormous atrocities aren't always committed by people screaming dramatically about being evil. Sometimes they're committed by people treating something horrific as simply their job. Chapter 7. Your medical research. And then there's another part of your work. Experiments. Nazi doctors conducted numerous medical experiments on concentration camp prisoners without meaningful consent. Different camps specialized in different research. Some experiments investigated survival in extreme conditions. Others involved infectious diseases, sterilization, drugs, surgery, and other procedures. Prisoners could be deliberately exposed to enormous suffering, permanent injury, or death. Normally, medical research has this tiny, annoying requirement called consent. Your workplace has apparently decided that's optional, along with ethics and basic humanity. Medical knowledge, consent, ethics, war crimes. Some Nazi doctors attempted to justify these experiments by claiming the research could help German soldiers or advance scientific knowledge. But there's a fairly obvious problem. You cannot simply torture human beings because you think you might learn something useful. Medical ethics doesn't have a, but my experiment was really interesting, exception. Chapter 8. The other doctors. You're also not working alone. There are other SS doctors around you. Some will later become infamous. The most notorious is Josef Mengele. Mengele worked at Auschwitz and became particularly associated with selections and experiments on twins and other prisoners. You know when a coworker walks toward your desk and you immediately know your day is about to get worse? Imagine that, except your coworker is Josef Mengele. Actually, I've just remembered I have a meeting. Mengele's experiments inflicted horrific suffering, particularly on children. And despite becoming one of the most infamous Nazi doctors after the war, he would never face trial. We'll get back to that. Chapter 9. How do you live with this? This raises a question. How does somebody who studied medicine, someone who presumably understands suffering, participate in something like this? There's no single answer. Some doctors were committed Nazis. Some believed racial pseudoscience. Some were ambitious. Some wanted research opportunities. Some followed orders and adapted themselves to the system around them. But I was following orders doesn't magically erase personal responsibility, and this becomes incredibly important after the war. Because by 1944 and 1945, Germany is losing badly. The Allies are advancing from the west. The Soviet Union is advancing from the east. German cities are being bombed. The military situation is collapsing. And you're standing there thinking, guys, are we the bad guys? Mate, you participated in selections at a concentration camp. We're slightly past the point of uncertainty. Chapter 10. Everything collapses. As Allied forces approach concentration camps, the SS attempts to destroy evidence. Documents are burned. Prisoners are evacuated on brutal death marches. Some camps are abandoned, but the evidence is enormous. When Allied troops liberate camps, they encounter starving survivors, bodies, and physical evidence of mass murder. Photographs and film begin documenting what happened. And suddenly your uniform doesn't look like quite the career investment it did a few years ago. Oh, this? No idea where that came from. I've always been more of a civilian doctor. Nice try. Investigators are coming. Chapter 11. The Doctor's Trial. After Nazi Germany surrenders in May 1945, the Allies begin prosecuting major Nazi officials and others involved in war crimes. And doctors aren't exempt. From December 1946 to August 1947, American authorities conduct what becomes known as the Doctor's Trial in Nuremberg. 23 defendants are prosecuted. Most are physicians. The charges include war crimes and crimes against humanity connected to medical experiments and killings. Imagine sitting in the courtroom. A few years earlier, you had authority over prisoners who had almost none. Now you're the one being questioned. Documents are presented. Witnesses testify. Experiments are described. And suddenly, I was just doing my job. Isn't performing particularly well as a legal strategy. 7 defendants are ultimately sentenced to death. Others receive prison sentences. Several are acquitted. Chapter 12. The Nuremberg Code. But something incredibly important comes from the Doctor's Trial. The Nuremberg Code. 10 principles are articulated for ethical human experimentation. And the first principle is arguably the most important. Voluntary consent of the human subject is essential. In other words, researchers cannot simply decide, "You're participating in my experiment now." People need the ability to choose. The code also stresses avoiding unnecessary suffering, having scientifically justified experiments, and allowing subjects to end participation. These principles would become hugely influential in the development of modern research ethics. So when you hear about informed consent in medical research today, there is a dark historical reason why the concept became so strongly emphasized. Chapter 13. What happens to you? Now we reach the end of your story. And historically, there isn't one universal ending. Some Nazi doctors were executed. Some went to prison. Some returned to relatively ordinary lives after the war. And some escaped Europe entirely. Remember Josef Mengele? After the war, he avoided capture and eventually fled to South America. He lived in countries including Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil. Despite international efforts to find him, he was never brought to trial. He died in Brazil in 1979 after suffering a stroke while swimming. His identity was later confirmed. So, one of the most notorious doctors associated with Auschwitz never stood in a courtroom for what he'd done. Ending. And that's what makes this story worth understanding. At the beginning, you're simply a young doctor. Educated, respectable profession, normal life. But then, each step moves you further. You accept discriminatory policies. You join organizations. You participate in systems that strip people of their rights. You start treating human beings as categories instead of individuals. And eventually, you're standing inside one of history's worst atrocities, while still calling yourself a doctor. The terrifying lesson isn't simply that Nazi doctors were uniquely evil monsters. It's that education and intelligence alone don't make someone moral. Doctors help perpetrate these crimes despite understanding the human body better than almost anyone else. Medicine gives people enormous power, and without ethics, that power can be abused. So, your medical career didn't exactly go according to plan. You started with a white coat. You ended with investigators asking some extremely uncomfortable questions. Medical degree. S A S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S. Side chosen in World War II. Catastrophically incorrect. Place in history. Absolutely cooked. But behind the jokes is something that shouldn't be forgotten. The victims of Nazi medical persecution were real people. They had families, careers, plans, and lives that were destroyed by a regime that attempted to disguise racism and murder as science. And understanding how doctors became part of that system is one way of understanding why modern medicine puts such enormous importance on human dignity, informed consent, and medical ethics. Approximately 6 million Jews were murdered during the Holocaust, alongside millions of other victims of Nazi persecution. And that was your life as a Nazi camp doctor. Subscribe for more POV history and what-if stories.